Hello there, I'm Kios, the Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to Lounge Ronin, all things, everything. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And on this episode, we're going to discuss the Amazons, the real female fighters, displaying myth and legend. Now, this will be a light introduction. And with all things everything, I implore you to do your own research, as you may be surprised at what you discover about yourself and the world. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Alrighty. This article was updated July 18th, 2019 by B.B. Wagner. The Amazons, the female fighters, displaying myth and legend. Famous ancient Greek historian Herodotus once wrote of the Amazons, or as he called them, Unir Pata, killers of men, a tribe of fierce warrior women. Though in today's world, the name Amazon is strongly associated with Jeff Bezos' mighty online delivery empire, it still carries a heavy association with these gender role breaking, fist fighting, sword swinging, arrow shooting, single breasted warrior women of antiquity. For centuries, they were dismissed as mere legend, but in the last decades, detailed investigations have revealed that the Amazons were very real, and they were a fearsome force to be reckoned with. The Amazons are believed to have been the descendants of a nomadic ancient Sicilians and Samaritan people. Their territory ranged from the slopes of Caucasus Mountains between the eastern end of the Black Sea and all the way to the vast Eurasian steppes. In every myth, whether they be Persian, Greek, or Scythian, the Amazons remained consistent in their depictions. They rode horses, shoot arrows, were uneasy around boats, and even wore pants. However, the question remains, who were they really? In Greek myths, Homer first mentioned the existence in the Iliad. They appeared fighting against Achilles on the side of Troy. In Hercules' ninth labor, he was tasked by the Eurystheus to steal the belt or girdle from the Amazon queen. Another story mentioned the ill-fated marriage of Theseus and Hypatia, resulting in one of the earliest perspectives to traumas that parent separations may bring on their children. In ancient Rome, the mythical stories about Amazons were reenacted in gladiatorial arena. Warrior gladiators were given the names of famous Greek Amazon queens and fought in hand-to-hand combat to the first cut. Now, we did cover this on the channel in the live stream section. If you look for the Gladiatrix episode, we do talk about the female gladiators. So check that out after this episode if it piques your interest. Let us continue. With such fantastic tales retold throughout the ages, it is understandable why most people assume the Amazons never existed. Their legends and history challenged the male-dominated establishment and planted seeds of rebellion in the minds of their women. However, in the 12th century, Russian archaeologists began to re-examine their existence when excavations of Scythian kurgans, Scythian burial mounds, revealed startling finds. Now, if you guys have listened to my past episodes, you know that I love a classic phrase from Star Wars, and it goes, "There's always a bit of truth in legends." And I think this might be one of those many, many cases. All right, let's continue. The motives to the myth about the Amazons. In the myths of the ancient Greeks, they never questioned whether the Amazons truly existed. Their tales were used to contrast the natural values 5th century BC Athens allegedly carried. Athenian Greek women were expected to be good family women, productive of male heirs, and zealous in maintaining the household. To be anything less of those traits would be Amazonian in nature. And I guess that would coincide with Sparta and the Spartan women, who the Greeks considered to be some of the most beautiful women ever to have existed in the Mediterranean. So I think it's a very interesting contrast when you think of Spartan women and the fact that, um, due to the homosexuality that was so prevalent within the Spartan military, that women who were married to Spartan soldiers would have to shave their heads and dress up like slave boys in order to seduce their husbands during marriage night. Um, when you look into some of these aspects of ancient cultures, things start to get really kinky and interesting. But I highly recommend people to go out there and do your own research onto those topics if it interests you. Let us continue. Amazon women, according to ancient Athenian men, were loose, brawlers, hot tempered, and unable to fully mature into adulthood due to the carefree lifestyles. Some would say we are currently dealing with a plethora and oversaturation of Amazon women in Western society, but that's a conversation for another time. Of all the accounts mentioned about the Amazons, there is none which speaks more clearly than the works of Herodotus. In his accounts, he remains as objective as possible. Most of his research was based on translating other accounts from Persia, as well as older writings from prior generation Greek scholars. His accounts remain the closest to the possible truth than any other writings about the Amazons. Herodotus wrote passages about their possible origins. His sentiments were the same. They were man killers who could kill 10 men with little to no effort. In one of his historical accounts, he mentioned that a group of Amazons were captured during the Battle of Thermodon. As the Greeks sailed home, the Amazons broke free and killed every single man on the ship. However, the Amazons were oblivious to the workings of the ship. They were left adrift for days until it crashed into the shores of Palus Meotios near Crimenia, translating to the cliffs. These lands had been known to the country of the free Scythians. The women, now freed from the shackles of the would-be fate, mounted wild horses and rode further inland, only to discover they were too far away from home. Man, some badass women, bro. And I was recently listening to the Higher Side chats, and he had a researcher on, and they were talking about the Kali Yuga and in the state of the Kali Yuga that we're in right now. And one thing that he was talking about was the de-evolution of man, and how he was saying that our craniums have shrunken over, of course, of thousands of years, as well as our bodies. And it's kind of makes, and he was kind of alluding to the fact that, in many ways, like, they don't want you looking into the whole idea of giants and these giant humans. And there are writings and talks about the Amazon women being giants, these large, strong, tall statured women. You kind of look at it in the sense of in DC, in Zack Snyder's world, like the way he presented the Amazonian women as these very strong, fit women. And I would just say add a couple, 2 more feet to them, and that would be a depiction of some Amazonian women that we've had, where they're these tall, almost giant-esque women. And the idea of female warriors is something that isn't new to antiquity. It's just unfortunate that nowadays in modern society we can't do justice to these warrior women of antiquity in a manner that not only respects history but also respects women as well. But that's a whole nother tangent. Let's continue. Enough of a Ronin rant. The languages which were spoken by the Amazons, though linguistically similar to the Scythians, still differed enough to be a hindrance. Herodotus noted that the Scythians assumed the Amazons were never taught to speak correctly. Though their dress appeared similar, they were worlds away from being the same people. Rumor had it that with no hope of returning home, The Amazons resorted to a life as raiders, plundering every Scythian village they could find. Herodotus went on to discuss how after the Amazon rage, the vengeful Scythian men went after them, but after days of conflict, efforts were made for a peaceful outcome. Both groups were able to learn enough about each other's dialect in order to communicate. It was in there that their desire for blood was soon replaced with a desire for intercourse. These two groups eventually intermarried and became the Scythian Samaritans. They then moved northeast to live nomadic way of life. It's also mentioned that this group created a tradition of training both men and women in the ways of hunting, shooting bows and arrows, horseback riding, and the basics of warfare. Though it may seem like a technicality, in this there can be no room for further explore what Herodotus was saying. Herodotus stated that these Amazons seemed like Scythians yet did not speak Scythian fluently. He noted that when actual Scythian men met with the Amazons and fell in love, the men were given the ultimatum to either leave or join them in their quest to return home. If the women were Scythians, why would they ask the Scythian men to leave their customs and families behind? The clues about the Amazons, as mentioned by Herodotus, discuss a group of people who had little in common except for technological similarities. With these slight clues mentioned, how could the women be considered Scythian at all? Well, I guess you could say a little bit of misinformation. Merging the myth and fact of the Amazons. According to ancient Greeks, the term Scythian acted as a generalization for an entire nomadic cultural group. Oh, okay, racism. As far as ancient Greeks were concerned, anything past Thrace and heading in Inner Asia was essentially the land of the Scythians. If one were to analyze this massive generalization, one would notice that this region accounted for thousands of miles and consisted of hundreds of cultures, languages, and ethnicities, which may have been completely different from one another. However, if we're to continue reading the passage of Herodotus, further clues would actually lean to the favor of the Amazons being Scythians. One passage regarding the origins of the Scythians by Herodotus may have unintentionally explained the rise of the Amazon warrior woman the world knows today. The passage describing the retribution brought forth from the 28-year war with the Medes. Quote, they, the Scythians, entered Asia in pursuit of the Cimmerians and overthrew the empire of the Medes. On the return to their homes after the long absence of 28 years, a task awaited them more troublesome than their struggle with the Medes. They found an army of no small size prepared to oppose their entrance. For the Scythian women, when they saw that time went on and their husbands did not come back, they had intermarried with their slaves. End quote. His passage goes on to describe how the returning Scythian men dealt with their own people and slaves, not recognizing who they were. However, given the description about the possible formation of the Scythians, could this tie together the reason why the captured Amazons spoke Scythian badly? Rather than being that they were an extremely different group, could it have been that they were the offspring of slaves and women who ran away from one of the Scythian villages? In the passage, it clearly states that the women were slaves. Women and slaves were able to put up a worthy fight against the war-hardened men who had been absent for 28 years. Could such a long absence have created a cultural shift, making the women the dominant warrior over men? And could this have led to the traditions of warrior duality between the sexes that was shared by the Scythian Samaritans in the years to come? Archaeological facts about the Amazons. In 1993, the mummified remains of a Sinco-Siberian woman from the 5th century BC, famously named the Siberian Ice Maiden, was excavated from burial mound also known as the Kurgan in the Republic of Alta Russia. Forensic anthropologists eventually determined her age of death between 20 or 30 years of age due to breast cancer and severe trauma sustained from a fall. The Ice Maiden's body, along with the remains of 2 horses, were oriented toward the east. And later excavations of other kurgans, this was revealed to be a consistent custom. The Ice Maiden's burial mound held a plethora plethora of items revealing further insights to the mysterious Scythian people. But of all the incredible artifacts from her Kurgan that fascinated the world, it was the garments she wore and the tattoos she had, still preserved from the arid permafrost of the steppe. In her larch wood coffin, she was adorned with a yellow silk Tuscan blouse, striped wool skirt of crimson and white, and a tassel belt, thigh high white felt leggings with a matram fur, a polished metal mirror by her side, and a 3 foot tall headdress. 3 foot tall, damn. Even though Russian archaeologists had assumed her to be a priestess of some kind, the Ice Maiden's funeral dress closely resembled the depictions of Greek Amazons from the 5th and 6th century BC Greek vases. And here we have one of those said vases. In further expeditions, Russian archaeologists continued excavating over 150 additional ancient Scythian kurgans in the Altai mountain regions, Provovodka and Kazakhstan. To their surprise, they discovered that almost one-third were women of elite warrior status. The kurgans included bows, daggers, and the women appeared to be of high rank. Some of the remains had women in battle dress no different than the remains of warrior men. There were young women showing characteristics of bow-leggedness, a trait resulting from a life of constant riding. There was bronze-tipped arrows, iron daggers, and some women were even being buried next to horses. These women further astonished archaeologists by revealing their height to be 5 feet 6 inches, a height that was significantly tall, especially for that time. Really? 5 feet 6 inches was especially tall for that time? How small was everybody back then? Damn. The assumptions made by why there are so many Scythian, Sumerian, Sarmatarian warrior women can be linked to the nomadic way of life. They were trained in survival from a very young age, using the techniques learned from both their mothers and fathers. When Scythian men were away in battle or engaged in the hunt, their women had to be able to defend themselves against the elements and other nomad raiders. The women needed to be as tough as the men in order to survive the harshness of the steppe. With 150 Kurgan mounds revealing large amounts of evidence to the existence of warrior women, there was a strong possibility that these the cough, and I didn't want to get that into the mic. However, um, there is a strong possibility that these women were the inspiration for the concept of Amazons. However, there are still assumptions, and one must always question what they have found. Closing thoughts about the Amazons. In the eyes of the ancient male Athenian Greeks, they were the epitome of feminine rebellion in dire need of being tamed. However, in the opinions of 12th century scholars, the Amazons embodied the association of freedom, sexual equality, and the undoing of the patriarchal status quo. If all were to agree with the Scythian Sarmatians were indeed the Amazons, regardless of their massive generalization made by the Greeks, historians, and even archaeologists, then could be Herodotus' description of the Scythian origin potentially be the beginnings of the Amazons. The Amazon Scythian hypothesis has convincing evidence to make it a strong possibility. However, they still may not have been the same people as warrior women known as the Amazons. As previously mentioned, the land of the ancient Thessians encompassed thousands of miles. Within those thousands of miles are also thousands of possibilities leading to many more questions. Which is a good way to put it because, for all we know, the information regarding or the archaeological remains and sites regarding the true Amazon women may not have been discovered yet. That's just a possibility. Or it has been and it's too fantastical and they're suppressing it. Since, that's one thing that we also have to remember that um, the that the mainstream academia, whether it's in the science community, archaeology community, philosophy community, whatever it may be, the academia, they will suppress information. And I'm not saying that this is the case with the information regarding the Amazons, but you never know. Just something to keep in mind. In the 12th century, there was further discussion about whether the Amazons were women at all. but Asiatic groups who contained less facial hair than the Greeks. A highly unlikely but not unusual theory to consider. After all, conquistadors once thought that Native Americans of South America were Amazon warrior women simply because they fashioned no facial hair at all. They were so convinced of this that they named the entire region the Amazon warrior women. Whatever the true history may be, there is no doubt that these fearsome warrior women were not to be underestimated. Now, we're going to continue, and we're actually going to touch on this theory that perhaps they weren't women at all, but pretty boys. Let's continue. Now, this article is updated June 28th, 2024 by Nicholas Costa. Quote, vaginas have received you and you know of nothing else. End quote. Finding the Amazons. Alrighty. Feminist Amazons? In the conclusion to her essay in the Feminist Theology magazine, Olga Papmikali writes, quote, the independent and radical nature of the Amazon spirit changed the way men used to see female gender in ancient Greece and in the ancient world. In general, questioning male domination by risking and sacrificing their lives for their feminist fight. End quote. Amazons, the reality behind the legend. Lesbian Amazons, end quote. Lesbian Amazons, quote, the Amazons have been an enduring figure of inspiration for lesbians, women of all kinds, and transgender men in the 1970s. Lesbian feminists in the United States adopted the Amazons as their forebears as they defied patriarchy and decided to live without men, in a fashion that became known as lesbian separatism. Walter Devon, Penrose, Introduction, The Appeal of the Amazons, Journal of Lesbian Studies, 2024, end quote. Alrighty. Transgender Amazons? However, the Amazons have not only been epitoposed by feminists and lesbians, gender nonconformists have also adopted them as their symbol, claiming thereby to be their direct inheritors. In many retellings of the myth, the Amazons are equated with men. This led author Leslie Feinberg, Transgender Warriors, 1996, pages 22, 57 to 58, to include the Amazons in the book. Interesting. So what you're seeing here is the antiquity and the myth and legend of the Amazon women being used for social cultural propaganda. Wow. Fascinating. Some might say communism. But I digress. Let's continue. West Coast or Asia Minor, Scythia or Samartia. According to Greek mythology, chronology, the earliest stories about Amazons locate them in the regions of Lycia, Carla, Lydia, and Troy, and ultimately relocates them in the Themyscira near the coast of the Black Sea. Classical chronological dates this period to 1335 to 1184 BC. This is therefore centuries before the arrival of the Scythians or the Sarmatians, with whom the Amazons were later equated, but which synchronized closely with the Hittite historical records concerning Arzawa and Ahoyawi and the events in the Western Asia Minor. The Scythians do not appear until much later. They were nomadic people who are known from as early as the 9th century BC, who migrated west from Central Asia to southern Russia and Ukraine in the 8th and 7th centuries. They established an empire centered in the Crimea. It survived for a few centuries before succumbing to the Sumerians in the 4th century BC. The origin of the Sumerians is revealed to be an alternative name of Sarumantians, or lizard eyes, indicating thereby of a far eastern origin. Is that like a racist connotation there? Lizard eyes? Or am I just reading a little bit too into that? Y'all let me know down in the comments. As can be readily seen, the peoples, the Greeks and the Romans, designated as Amazons, were in fact ethnically diverse and not one cohesive group. The common element was that all these groups were located in regions which ultimately became subject to colonization by Greek speaking migrants. Interesting. The author's work entitled Atlantis, the Amazons, and the Birth of Athena pinpoints the location and identities of the earliest layers of the Amazon mythos. They, in fact, represent the indigenous populations encountered by the early Greeks as they rose to power on the Mediterranean seaboard of Asia Minor. It is this layer that is the focus of the present work. Propaganda. The Amazons were portrayed by the Greeks as women. However, as we still demonstrated, what one is dealing with is evidently propaganda perpetuated by Greek victors against their enemies. Propaganda, as defined by Arler Kunkik, quote, is a type of communication that often involves sharing biased or misleading information to promote a particular agenda or point of view. Propaganda is used to influence people's opinions. Propaganda is often used in war. War propaganda often relies on misinformation and name calling or the use of derogatory terms to achieve its goals. End quote. The Anxiety Workbook, 2017. A wide variety of propaganda techniques are listed in Kunkik, among which are name calling, using derogatory terms to describe an opponent or enemy, manipulating information involves distorting or misrepresenting the facts to influence people's opinions, stereotyping is a technique that uses oversimplified and often inaccurate ideas or beliefs to describe an opponent or enemy. Snob appeal uses the idea of exclusively to make something seem more desirable. Loaded language uses language to invoke certain emotions or feelings. In reality, there are no armies or societies based exclusively upon women or transgender males. Having said this does not downplay the role of women in antiquity. Victorian misconceptions. Martine de Marais writes, quote, valor was almost exclusively the preserve of men, and being publicly honored for that valor remained overwhelmingly the preserve of the elite male. If you were not at the top of the social hierarchy of the ancient world, it meant, firstly, that your story, that of sub-elite classes, of the other ethnic groups, and of women, was tangentially to that of the male elite warrior. Fortunately for us, this tangential information reveals that women and other marginalized groups played more of a role in the military conflicts of their cities than might be supposed. Even if you were not fighting on the battlefield, in times of crisis, it was in the interest of every inhabitant of besieged city to play a role, however small in its defense, the poor, the disabled, slaves, and women. End quote. Very fair point. That's very true. Whilst they didn't form marauding armies, women have always played an important role in the maintenance and defense of their communities. Thus, the extreme portrayal of women as helpless and cowering in the corner while their men valiantly defend them against unspeakable odds, as depicted by upper class Victorian ethos and the early 20th century Hollywood potboilers, is equally false. Now, I would agree to that. Because women of that time, it, they couldn't be weak. When you listen to the descriptions of like Spartan women, for example, and I'm only picking Spartan women because like that documentary is really fresh in my mind and was well done. They weren't women that you could mess with. For instance, right? Spartan women would mock and harass and beat up Spartan men that have not fought and killed men in battle. They wouldn't date a man who hasn't killed somebody. Like, that's the type of women they were. They weren't women that you would want to mess with. So, this is and that's what I feel is kind of missing. And actually, Zack Snyder did a decent job in did he direct 300 Rise of the Empire or whatever? Like the prequel to the 300 to 300, where you see the Spartan queen and she's fighting and she's kicking ass. Even in in that one, she does some battling. Like you see that the Spartan women are capable. I mean, they don't really do that much highlighting the Spartan women in that regard, but they were very capable women. And I mean, you have to think about that in many regards of these situations that these women had to protect the family, they had to protect the home. So even if the men were away, these women were the last line of defense in case anyone came toward the villages. So I would have to say that women of those eras were definitely were built different than women of now. That I would 100% agree with. Let's continue. The mayor wrote notes, quote, polarization of the other was intensified in the periods of extreme conflict, and often a narrative or propaganda in the hands of the elite. War was therefore a great catalyst of polarities which defined and boosted the identity of those who engaged in battle. It therefore also intensified polarities in the areas of class and gender. It was thought shameful for a soldier to be identified with the other, a slave or a woman. End quote. Women in Warfare in the Ancient World. Martin de Mera, 2021. That's interesting there. It does kind of make note to a little bit to how it is nowadays, how it's kind of been inversed. And like I was saying earlier, the Spartan women would harass, make fun of, and even beat up Spartan men that have been killed in battle. So back then, women wanted to be with and were attracted to capable men. There's a reason why warriors of great had all these massive harems of women, because those women knew that they were going to be protected and well cared for. So these are things that we have to take into consideration. This is just really interesting how this has evolved. The conversation, fascinating. Let's continue. Not women, not transgender. The designation of women in antiquity delineated physical weakness in relation to a male. It was commonly used as an insult. It still is. Thus, in the Iliad at 780, Menelaus addresses his troops and calls them women for not meeting Hector's challenge. Even Plato consistently characterizes women as being weak and cowardly. In Timaeus, he states that men who lived cowardly lives will be reincarnated as women. However, it is a grave error of modern scholarship to merely assert that the myths of Amazons being defeated at the hands of Greek men certainly may have served an ideological function to reinforce traditional Greek gender roles. Well, I mean, history is written by the victor. And in that regard, by writing history, you're also shaping culture. When you are writing history, you are also shaping culture. Or to focus on questions such as, could these myths be a reflection of the patriarchal society in Greece, in which violence against women was normalized or even eroticized? The Amazons, Classical Association, 2023. The latter are certainly not the underlying reasons as to why the Amazon mythos arose. Here we have an image of a Roman mosaic depicting Hippias in combat with an Amazon, 4th century AD. Defeated enemies. The common element in the Amazon myths is that they were invariably defeated by the Greek heroes. Indeed, the only time Amazons were depicted as victorious in the myth of the Myria is told by Diodias Siculus, although even she too is ultimately defeated on her own return to Asia Minor. The latter myth, however, pertains to a much earlier period, 1700 BC, and reflects the elements of the Hyksos takeover of Egypt rather than the post-1300 BC era as explained in the author's work entitled Atlantis, the Amazons, and the birth of Athens and the subsequent articles published in the Ancient Origins website. There's one overriding element that the entire Middle Eastern region, if not the world, shares throughout the diverse cultures is that the defeated enemies were consistently referred to as women. For example, an Amorite leader criticized another for not joining him to campaign with Ziram of the Myric, 1775 to 1761 BC, as follows: "You're unworthy of your race. At the very damn, at the very place where your father and mother first saw your face when you dropped from her vagina. Vaginas have received you, and you know of nothing else." Damn. Wow. Well, first off, you are unworthy of your race. Oh my lord. Oh my gosh, bro. If at the very place where your father and mother first saw your face when you dropped from her vagina, vaginas have received you and you know of nothing else. Is that not the most eloquent way to call somebody a pussy? If that is, I don't know what else. Oh my. That is incredible. Let's continue. Gina Konstantopoulos writes, quote, "The trope of equating masculinity with warrior qualities and martial prowess is broadly represented throughout the ancient Near East, arising from the ability of the imaginary. We see the emergence primarily in the latter half of the second millennia BC, or of specific type of insults and curses whereby men, particularly in material contexts, are threatened with the removal of their masculinity, namely warrior abilities, and the imposition of enforced femininity. Their weapons are taken from them, and they are rendered powerless and equated directly to women." End quote. Gender Identity and Cursing in Mesopotamia, Gina Konstantopoulos, 2020. Now that's really interesting. Like, this is really interesting because it kind of brings the idea of what if the whole concept of the Amazon warrior was just propaganda of an army, of a nation state of warrior men that were just pansies. This is fascinating. I was not expecting this turn. I highly recommend people do your own research onto this to further expound on these concepts and ideas. This is fascinating. The bow as a metaphor. Greek texts can characterize the Amazon women as experts with the bow. Iona Zazari points out the significance of the bow in the Middle East. She writes, quote, "The bow of Akkadian curses, incantations, and other literature also directly formed part of this constellation as a particularized smile for the erect penis or for aggressive male sexuality. In one, for instance, taking away the enemy's bow is enough to turn him into a woman. The enemy warrior without a bow is then a man without a penis. But a man without a bow/penis is not a eunuch. He is worse. He is a woman." End quote. Wow. I want to repeat that last part. The enemy warrior without a bow is then a man without a penis. But a man without a bow or penis is not a eunuch. He is worse. He is a woman. Bro. This was a quote, YouTube. These views do not reflect Kielster Ronin Beatmaker or Ronin Art and Music. As you can see on the screen, this is a quote from Iona Zalcine. Yeah, so you can come at her. But wow. This really, if you really think about it, it really adds some very interesting thoughts to this whole concept of Amazon. Like, we really need to have a serious conversation about it. Well, I guess not really serious, but definitely a philosophical, social, socio-cultural conversation about what does it mean? because we're learning some very interesting metaphors when it comes to the Amazon. And I'm starting to think that like we're dealing with like maybe the world's first like troll. Like I don't even know how to explain it, but like this is really interesting. Very, very interesting. Let's continue. Wait, here we have the victory stele of Naram Sin. The Curse of Agade is a story from the Ur-Thur period of Mesopotamia. It narrates the tale of Akkadian king Naram Sin and his confrontation with the gods, turning men into women. The defeated were not only routinely described as women, they were also in many instances literally emasculated. The grape of an enemy soldier on the battlefield, a well documented ancient practice, is similarly a generated act that womanizes the defeated. You know, that classic saying of, making somebody, your bitch. This is essentially what we're seeing here. Um, Now, if it's really interesting that we're starting to get this whole idea that this terminology was just a derogatory propaganda to diminish the males that survived being taken over by the Greeks. Those warring tribes or what have you. Being conquered by the Greeks or it seems like any of these large kingdoms of antiquity, you were essentially called a little pussy. This is crazy. This is absolutely fascinating. I can't get over what Iona says here with the bow, the metaphor of the bow. It's really, really fascinating. Oh, it's so fascinating. All right, let's continue. Israel, late 11th century BC. In 1 Samuel 18:25, Saul demands 100 Philistine foreskins from David in return for his daughter. Oy, oy, oy. This is not just an act of castration, it is an affront to gender, calling into the question Philistine's manly honor. David delivers twice what is required. Whew. Bro, man. Yo, those ancient Christians were wild. Quote, David arose and went, he and his men, and slew the Philistines, 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. Samuel 18:27. Yeah, and I guess calling him manly, David, are you man enough? Can you go out and kill 200 men? Now, I don't know if foreskins is a metaphor for their heads. I don't know. But interesting. All right. Cynthia R. Chapman writes, feminization in both sects of texts, ancient Near East and Hebrew Bible, is used metaphorically to discredit men on the battlefield, and the associated commonplaces of feminization are broken, missing, or removed weapons, implements of weaving or bowed posture, labor pain, sexual abuse, and prostitution. End quote. The gender language of warfare in the Israelite-Assyrian encounter, 2004. Wow. It's just all psychological warfare. Psychological warfare and propaganda. Huh. Assyria. Reprisals against the dead became a feature of Assyrian royal inscriptions in the reign of Tukulati Ninurta, 1243 to 1207 BC. By Sennacherib's time, the description of the Battle of Elulia, 1691, states, quote, with the bodies of their warriors, I filled the plain like grass. Their testicles I cut off and tore out their privates like the seeds of cucumbers of Siwan. End quote. Death and Dismemberment in Mesopotamia. Seth Richardson, 2007. Jeez Louise. Oh, man. Like, it's like this whole concept of just emasculation and like, physical castration and like psychological emasculation. Physical castration and psychological emasculation. Wow. Egypt. Urus Matik writes, quote, in ancient Egypt, there seems to have been a long tradition of feminization rhetoric with early examples dating to the Middle Kingdom. Similar expressions are found in Nubian texts. To a pharaoh is a representative of ideal masculinity and his enemies of failed masculinity associated with femininity. End quote. Violence and Gender in Ancient Egypt. Urus Maltik, 2021. The Namur Plate, dating from the reign of the king Namur, 3273 to 2987 BC, depicts two rows of decapitated and bound enemies, with their genitalia placed on their heads. God damn. This detail commemorates a victory celebration. The scene has been described as the aftermath of an act of punishment, the execution and deliberate humiliation of enemy prisoners depicted and emasculated. End quote. What did I say? Emasculation. And so the survivors who witnesses are psychologically emasculated from ever rising up again. You gotta think about that. The severed phalli are displayed prominently as a way to heap insult upon injury to the slain enemies. The Namur Plate, an overlooked detail. Davis R. Friedman, 2002. Man, I might have to add some of these books to the wish list because there's some fascinating information in here. So here we have both sides of that Namur Plate that we were just discussing. Whew. Pharaoh Meripata, 1213 to 1203 BC, of the 19th century sought to humiliate his traditional enemies, referred to as the Nine Bows. Quote, 9 bows are before him, the king, like women of the harem, end quote. Murtafa waged war in 1208 against the combined Libyan army and the invading horde of sea peoples. Phoenicians? He was victorious, and as recorded in the Arabidia stele in the Cairo Museum, the uncircumcised phalli from the slain Libyans were carried off to the place where the king was totaling 6,111 men. In total, the Egyptians amassed 12,240 severed penises and did not discriminate among rank or nation. Well, how progressive of the Egyptians to be so inclusive. Let's continue. Ramses III, 1186 to 1155 BC. His soldiers collected thousands of penises following the Battle of Kesnef Tamu in present-day Syria. These offerings are depicted on the walls of Mildiat Habu temple, where Ramses subjects are seen laying enemy hands and penises at his feet. Notably, the defeated enemies of a coalition of Pelesti, Terjerker, Denyen, Shekelesh, and Weshesh were possibly peoples who originated from the regions in Western Asia Minor, the very same regions the Greek myths ascribed to the early Amazons. Ramses, by emasculating his enemies, had effectively turned them into an army of women. And here we have that same mural. Oh boy. The triumphal stela of Pera and Kushna and the Kushite king and founder of the 25th dynasty, quote, now these kings and counts of Northland came to behold his majesty's beauty, their legs being the legs of women. You return having conquered Northland, making bulls into women. Damn. Damn. This is incredible. Wow. Physical castration with physical castration with psychological emasculation. Damn. Hold on. I gotta type that out. I gotta tweet that. I gotta tweet that. Okay. Let's continue. Man, this is crazy. The Amazon breast. Much has been written as to whether or not the Amazon smeared or removed one breast in order to be able to shoot arrows. As to whether the word Amazon is linked to the Greek words for without a breast, asmaton. The masculine form therefore implies without a manly breast or lacking in courage. There are many theories, but hitherto scant attention has been paid to the fact, as elucidated in this article, that referring to defeated enemies as women lacking courage has commonplace throughout the Middle East in antiquity. The fact that the Greeks portrayed their enemies as women is in fact a huge joke. It was propaganda of the first order and nothing more. Likewise, the imaginary of Amazons was being expert with the bow, as noted earlier, itself a metaphor in the Middle East for the penis and manliness. And we know that, the Greeks had a lot of influence from the Middle East as well as Africa. So we're seeing that even in the Middle East, this idea of equating men with women, who are equating defeated men as women, was prevalent as well. It just seems that the Greeks perfected this propaganda. It is in the context that one needs to read into the story of women amputating one breast in order to fight more effectively, which is partially false assertion. Men do not have breasts, but they do have penises, which once severed effectively turned them into women. Was the word Amazon therefore actually an early metaphor for a castrated enemy? Questions, questions, questions. And there you have it. The Amazons, the real female fighters, displaying myth and legend. Now, we just covered a lot of some fascinating psychological and physical propaganda. And I highly implore people out there to please do your research onto this topic. But needless to say, I would say that a lot of the themes that we have discussed in this are very prevalent right now in Western society, as we are currently witnessing the castration of America, the emasculation of Western society. It's been going on for quite some time now, probably starting around 2016. But these themes that we have just discussed, I'm noticing more and more nowadays. And it is slightly concerning. But it's also very eye-opening to how the propaganda has evolved, so much so that it's affecting Western society, especially in the US. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into it right now, because I could say some things that could cause some controversy. But needless to say, right now you are experiencing American society being turned into, well, I should say you are now experiencing a bunch of men of American and Western society being turned into a bunch of Amazon women. Whether it's the red pill boys, the incels, the male feminist, whatever you have. The emasculation of the American man and the castration of American society has been displayed in the propaganda that we just covered. Like I always said, there's always a bit of truth in legends. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. If you made it this far, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love. Hello there, I'm Kios Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome.